British sea and air defences of Malaya and Singapore soon suffered disastrous setbacks. The Japanese celebrated an early victory of great significance when the battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse were quickly sunk by air attack. The air defences consisted mainly of obsolete Brewster Buffalo fighter planes. The bomber force included old and slow Bristol Blenheim bombers. This British force was totally outclassed by Zero fighters and Mitsubishi bombers, and although their pilots fought bravely, the planes were soon reduced to wrecks. The first in a series of events that contributed to the end of the British Empire happened near here. This is the town of Jitra in northern Malaya. Not far away there are the remains of pillboxes and barbed wire. Amid encroaching jungle, there are fortifications long abandoned by the British.
There's an old proverb that goes, "For want of a nail, the horseshoe was lost. For want of a horseshoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the messenger was lost. For want of a messenger, the battle was lost. For want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail."
In December 1941, a Punjab regiment held this village, Kampong Imam, and Gurkhas held the village of Kampong Anson. The crucial feature of the defence line was the Jitra River, which is not wide, but deep. The defenders were attacked by battle-hardened Japanese troops with tanks and put under enormous pressure. In some confusion, in the heat of battle, the divisional commanders gave orders to burn stores and holdings of rubber stocks.
Other British forces pulled back and destroyed the bridge over this waterway. The problem was there were still 3,000 Indian troops trapped on the other side of the river.
A perception spread that English soldiers had saved themselves at the expense of their Indian comrades.
The perception was totally wrong, but it was a horseshoe nail, as it were.
The British tried to regroup in a rubber plantation. Then the men of the 1st 14th Punjab Regiment refused to obey. They mutinied and surrendered themselves to the Japanese. Among the leaders of the mutiny was the senior Indian soldier of the regiment, Captain Mohan Singh, here pictured seated between two other soldiers. The British forces had to pull back through plantations and jungles. The jungle was a hostile place, not least because of natural hazards. Some of the retreating British units became disoriented and lost their cohesion. The Japanese rapidly outflanked them. Their secret weapon was nothing more than the bicycle. It allowed for quick and silent movement. Soon the Japanese had captured Kuala Lumpur and many British prisoners. Fortifications and barracks were left behind in the retreat. Peacetime fortifications and barracks proved to be inadequate in wartime. Some forts still remain, but the guns are long gone. The Japanese did suffer some checks. At the Muar River on 18 January, a column was ambushed. The Japanese tanks were halted, and an attack repulsed. However, they eventually outflanked the defenders and moved on towards Johor and Singapore. There remained an air of unreality in British headquarters. General Percival later wrote that he faced 150,000 Japanese troops supported by 300 tanks. In reality, for the final assault on Singapore, the Japanese had only 30,000 men and just 18 tanks. Singapore itself came under attack in early February. This is an imagined view of the assault. This was the reality. On 14 February, General Percival surrendered his forces to the foe, here portrayed in a Japanese print. The Japanese Army of Malaya entered Singapore next day, and the surrendered British and Australian soldiers were marched off to Changi Prison. And so to Farrer Park on the fateful day of mutiny, 17 February. The captured Indian soldiers were separated from their officers and marched to the park. There they were addressed first by a British colonel who, in poorly chosen words, told them that henceforth they belonged to the Japanese army. Then Captain Mohan Singh, who had led the mutiny at Chitra, spoke. He gave a rousing speech and then called on all present to join a free Indian army and put an end to British rule in India. From all but a few, there was cheering and clapping, and then thousands came forward to enroll in the Indian National Army. The moving force behind the wartime Free India movement was Netaji Chandra Bose, a charismatic figure who died in a plane crash in 1945. He inspired many to join the INA, including women. Here, Chandra Bose is inspecting the Rani of Jhansi Women's Regiment in Singapore. Units of the INA fought briefly during the Japanese invasion of India in 1944. It was a spent force by the time of the Japanese surrender in Singapore in 1945. Earlier that year, Chandra Bose had dedicated a memorial to all Indian soldiers who had died for India. It was a large and striking memorial on the Singapore waterfront. When the British returned to Singapore in September 1945, they demolished it. In its place was erected a memorial to those who had died in British armed forces. However, in 1986, the Indian government sponsored a new memorial in Singapore to the men of the Indian National Army.
The monument here in Singapore tells the story of the Indian National Army in 6 languages. There is an irony in that it's sited here, because just a few metres away is the Singapore Cricket Club, the very bastion of the pucker Englishmen.
Back in India, there were strong moves for independence. Initially, the British resisted, but then they made a crucial mistake. They charged 3 former officers of the Indian National Army with treason based on events in Farrer Park. The men were found guilty in January 1946, but the sentences were immediately commuted. Soon afterwards, there was a mutiny at the RAF base at Calcutta, which spread all over the country. In February, there was a mutiny in the Royal Indian Navy at Bombay, and that also spread to other bases until 10,000 men in 45 ships were involved. At Karachi, the frigate Hindustan was retaken by British paratroopers, but at the cost of 6 dead and 24 injured. The unrest spread to civilians, and in rioting in Calcutta, 38 people died. The mutinies threatened to cause wider violence, but the British authorities at last realised that without the support of the Indian armed forces, their rule was no longer tenable. They agreed to withdraw from India. Indian independence came on 15 August 1947. The ceremony was conducted with pomp and circumstance. Crowds filled streets and parks across the country to celebrate the new age. So British troops left by sea, as they had come in the 18th century. The speed of the British withdrawal bewildered some. After all, it seemed that 190 years of British rule in India ended virtually overnight, after a span of just months of unrest. There had been riots for sure, but they had seen no substantial crisis fit to end an empire. They did not recognise that a crisis had indeed taken place, although it had occurred in a distant city under Japanese occupation, far from Western media. That crisis, the mutiny in Farrer Park, had proved to be the fatal blow to the unbroken loyalty of the Indian soldier to his British officers. Singapore today is a bustling world city. The site of Changi Prison, where the surrendered British forces endured 4 years of captivity, is today the site of Singapore's international airport. In Farrer Park in Singapore, where the largest Indian mutiny signified the end of empire, it's ironic that a British cultural icon remains. The crowds love their cricket.